spent in a miserable way.
U.S. news path to Trump's border wall narrows as Republicans balk at emergency declaration. The New by N. Washington. New President Trump's legislative path to a border wall has narrowed significantly on the eve of Tuesday's State of the Union speech, and his fallback plan to circumvent Congress by declaring a state of emergency could create a major division in his own party. As he prepares to make his case to the largest national audience of the year, Mr. Trump appeared to be in an increasingly precarious position, and the persuasion and compromise that have gotten previous presidents out of political jams. Anxiety over the damage being inflicted on the party is growing. Last week, but the president's supporters continue to plead for unity. This is the defining moment of his presidency, said Senator Lindsey Graham, a South Carolina Republican who is one of Mr. Trump's biggest supporters on Capitol Hill, speaking at an event in Greenville on Monday. To every Republican, if you that stand behind this president, we're not going to stand behind you when it comes to the wall, said Mr. Graham, adding that he feared a war within the Republican Party if Republicans did not support Mr. Trump's plan, including an emergency declaration. The president's advisors have said the speech will, but he is also, at the same time, Mr. Trump continued to brandish the threat of an emergency declaration that would allow him to divert existing federal funding to the wall, an idea that has sparked heated opposition among Senate Republicans, who have grown increasingly comfortable in their defiance. On Monday, in December, Republican senators broke with him to for Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen, as they recoiled from his inaction in the face of the kingdom's murder of a Washington Post columnist, Jamal Khashoggi. Mr. Trump is not expected to declare the state of emergency during Tuesday's address. But he continues, that has some Republicans openly fretting that such a declaration would embolden a Democratic president to declare a national emergency on climate change or gun violence. It would be a bad precedent, I think, for the president to decide to invoke national security as a way to bypass a congressional logjam, said Senator Patrick J. Toomey, Republican of Pennsylvania. And I can imagine that sentiment has been expressed by about a dozen Republican senators, publicly and privately, including Roy Blunt of Missouri, Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, Marco Rubio of Florida, Bill Cassidy of Louisiana and John Kerry of Texas, who is considered to be among the most influential members of his party on immigration. The whole idea that a president, whether it's President Trump or President Warren or President Sanders, you can declare an emergency and then somehow usurp the separation of powers and get into the business of appropriating money for specific projects without Congress getting involved is a serious constitutional question, Mr. Kerr said on Monday. But the most important critic of the declaration is Mr. McConnell. I don't think much of Mr. McConnell, according to three people familiar with his thinking, has grown increasingly frustrated with the White House in recent days, telling associates that he thinks members of the president's staff have failed to adequately brief him on the legislative and political perils of moving ahead with a disaster declaration. During his White House meeting, Mr. McConnell predicted that Speaker Nancy Pelosi would have the House immediately pass a resolution of disapproval attempting to block him from using existing funding for the wall. Any senator from either party could then demand a vote, because the resolution would be deemed privileged. Mr. McConnell, that would force the president into a politically costly effort to keep the Senate from overriding his veto of the resolution, even as Democrats move to block him in the courts. He has been talking about all this for a month, in front of the cameras, said Don Stewart, a spokesman for Mr. McConnell, who played down the exchange. The leader delivered a similar message to Vice President Mike Pence and the president's son-in-law and senior advisor, Jared Kushner, 3 weeks ago during negotiations to reopen the government. Since then, Democrats have begun drafting legislation that would remove the president's ability to shift money from one project to another. Representative John, administration officials struck a defiant note on Monday, saying the president needed the threat of a declaration to pressure Ms. Pelosi. The Congress has failed to do its job. This Congress, last Congress, and for quite a while, to make sure that we have what we need at the southern border, which of course the centerpiece is a physical barrier, wall, steel slats. Kellyanne Conway, the counselor to the president, told reporters. The House-Senate Negotiating Committee assigned to hammer out a border security deal to keep the government funded is expected to work through the week and into the weekend. Lawmakers will be. Democrats prefer a smart wall made up of sensors, drones and other technology but no physical structure. House Republicans on the committee spent Sunday and Monday on the border in Texas in McAllen and El Paso, accompanied by Representative Henry Cuellar, Democrat of Texas. Senator Richards, but all of that work could be blown up by an emergency declaration, a move that would endear Mr. Trump to the Republican base while infuriating Democrats. "I think he's going to do it," said Jeff Rose, a veteran Republican consultant and longtime political advisor to Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. He is responding.
Raindrop, drop top, top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that.